Evening all. It my pleasure to welcome you all for Low Power Design. On behalf of IEEE Cash Bangalore chapter, myself, Dr. Jalaja, IEEE BIT Student Branch Counselor, and IEEE Cash Chair Elect Bangalore section will be your host. And to welcome our Bangalore section chair, Dr. Mr. Puneet Kumar Mishra, for its great support and encouragement. And I would also like to welcome our today's speaker, Sabyasachi Nag. I also welcome section chair, cash chair, Dr. Devesh Divadi, and Mr. Alok Kumar Das, vice chair, Dr. Parameshwarachari, secretary, and
Ma'am, you are not
Mr.
audible.
Ayandat, treasurer. Not
Hello.
audible. One second, sir. Not audible. Hello.
No, now it's okay. Alok is online. Alok is online.
Okay, okay. And after the welcome speech, sir. Hello. Can you hear my voice?
Yes, madam. Yes, madam. Please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay, okay. I also
Yes, madam.
welcome
Yes,
our
yes.
okay. I also welcome our Bangalore section cash chair, Dr. Devesh Divadi, Mr. Alok Kumar Das, Vice Chair, and Parmeshwarachari, General Secretary, and Ayan Dutt, Treasurer, and respected teachers, students, and all my dear friends. It gives me a cozy welcome for everyone present in the interest of this today's webinar. Before we get started, IEEE Bangalore section was established in 1977, is one of the most vibrant as well as dynamic IEEE cache around the globe. IEEE Circuits and Systems Society is a leading technical society that promotes the advancement of theory, analysis, design, implementation of circuit systems, etc. If you are a IEEE cache or the faculty member or also entitled for various IEEE awards, subsidized registration fees to attend any educational resources, to free of charges on Cash Resource Center, free electronic access to the procedure of cash conferences, and multiple other benefits. In this regard, we would like to invite you to start IEEE Cash student chapters in your esteemed college. If anybody interested to form a new IEEE Cash student chapter or the branch in your college, please contact us. Once, if you're started with a cash student chapter, you will be getting lots of benefit in terms of the financial as well as the technically from IEEE Cash Global section. Currently, we are looking for IEEE Cash Bangalore chapter coordinator. Now, I think Puneet sir is not joined. Now, I would like to introduce our today's speaker, Sabyasachi Nag. He has over 23 years of experience in microprocessor design and EDA tool development. He started his career in 1977 at Texas Instruments in the area of IC reliability. He later worked at Bell Labs, Intel, Magma, and IBM in various technical and management roles in the area of high performance microprocessor implementation, advanced EDA tool development, and CAD flow for design implementation and sign off. Most recently, he is heading a VLSI design consulting startup, Adventa Technology, focusing on design implementation for complex SOC processor at advanced technology nodes. Sabyasachi received his BE in Electronics and Telecommunication Engineering from Jadavpur University, Calcutta in 1977. Before get started with the technical talk, I would like to request Dr. Parmeshwarachari to write a few words to participants about the cash membership. Sir? Parmeshwarachari, sir? Parmeshwariachari sir.
I think he's on mute.
Okay, okay, sir. No problem. You can start your presentation, sir. Now you are the presenter. Hello.
Yeah, I'm just
Yes,
loading.
yes, yes, yes.
Is my slide visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Okay, I believe most of the attendees will be on mute. So the interaction part, I don't know.
Yes, sir. Everyone will be in the mute. If they had any the questions or if they had any doubts, they has to type in question and answer window. Now, by seeing that, we have to answer it. That's it.
Yes. So,
Yes, you can go ahead, sir. Yeah.
So this message is for everyone. Thanks for joining on a late evening Friday call. Right, your weekend's already started. So thanks for taking time to join this. I'll try to make it as enjoyable as possible, as delicious as possible, keeping the technical part lightweight and making it relate to our day-to-day life. That's the intent, to bring some of the uh, the latest concepts in low power design.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, yes, madam. I'm audible.
Yes.
Yes, sir. You are audible, but the sir has been started his talk. Later on, you can talk, sir.
No, if you want to talk, you can finish it off before we start, right?
Parmeshwariachari, sir.
Either way, it's fine. Actually.
Yes, sir. You wanted to talk something? I think he left, sir. You can,
Okay.
sir. You can proceed, sir.
Continue. Okay, so I generally prefer an interactive class. So when Alok first told me that it will be a webinar, right? So I was just wondering, how do we make it more interactive? So since you guys are all on mute, at any point of time, if you have any questions or doubt, please text message. I should be able to see the text message, and I'll pause and try to answer your question. Similarly, I may ask some questions during my presentation. If you want to answer that, you can also text it, right? So either privately or to make it visible to everyone, right? So let's try to make it as interactive as possible, given the technical constraints that we have in a webinar. But I would still like it to be more interactive than a monologue from me, right? Don't leave all your questions at the end, right? Feel free to pause me or stop me at any point in time. Okay, so let's get started. So it all started way back in late 60s, right? When one gentleman named Gordon Moore, he made an observation that the number of transistor in a circuit is going to double every few years, right? He originally said about 1 year, then it became 2 year, and it is now like between 2 to 3 year cadence that has been happening since then, right? So since 1965 to 1970, right, when it all started, right, every new technology that has been introduced, right, we have seen the transistor count doubling, right, by feature size scaling, right? So every dimension in the chip, right, that got scaled by 0.7, and if you do a 0.7 into 0.7, it gives you roughly 0.5, right? So basically, it means in the same area you can pack double the number of transistor, right, in every successive generation of technology node. And now imagine if it has all started in late 60s, and every 2 to 3 years we introduced a new technology node, and it started with a base of a few thousand transistors probably, right, where we are today, right? So so that's a huge growth in number of transistors per chip or per wafer that we have observed in last 50 plus years, right? That resulted also in transistor cost reduction, because you are now packing more number of transistors in the same area, and as long as you can keep the wafer cost under check, if it doesn't go up too high, right? So your transistor cost per transistor actually decreases because you are just packing more transistors, right? So we have seen the transistor cost generation after generation, right, came down by roughly about 30 to 40%, right, in successive generation. Now, what does it mean, right? You now have a commodity, like transistor is basically, if I bring in an analogy, transistor is brick, right? Just like you use brick to build a house, you use transistor to build a circuit, right? Now, the two things are happening. You are getting more transistors per chip, and you are also getting them cheaper, right? So the trend has been, right, that since the transistors are coming cheaper and I can pack more transistors in the same footprint, right? Keep adding functionalities, keep adding features, keep making the processors or any other device more powerful, right? So what used to be a big, like wall-size computer, that became desktop computer. Desktop computer eventually became laptop computer. Laptop computer then became tablet, right? Smartphones, right? Today's smartphones are probably much more powerful than my first PC that I bought 20 years back. Right? So these are all the results of Moore's law that started late 60s. So after 50 years, where do we stand today? So last 10 years, we had been hearing one message time and again that Moore's law is slowing down, right? We are unable to scale, right? We are approaching the physical limit. How long we can scale, right? Like 65 nanometer became 40, 40 to 32, 32 to 22, 28, 22, 14, 10, 7, 5, 3, right? At some point in time, we'll reach physical limits, right? So that has been a discussion for last 10 years or so, that Moore's law probably at some point in time will end because of the physical limits. But nobody probably told at least as widely as the physical limits. The other thing that actually came as a big monster, that is the power limit. Much before we could actually hit the physical limits coming from Moore's law, we actually hit the power limit back in 65 nanometer or even 90 nanometer technology node, right? When the power started becoming unmanageable in the chip, just because we are packing more and more transistors. And imagine if in a very small space, you are crowding too many workhorses, right? Transistors are workhorses and they are all working, right? And burning power. What would be the total heat generation from that area, right? Or energy consumption. So theoretically speaking, right, when along with Moore's law, there was another law that is called Dehner scaling, right? Which was proposed by Dehner, right? What he proposed is that theoretically speaking, power density should not go up with scaling, right? Because here is the theoretical explanation, right? Transistor count to a power unit area is scaled by S square, right? If I am scaling each dimension by S, so transistor count will go up by S square, right? So, and we can increase the frequency by a scale factor of S every successive generation. Voltage is scaled by 1 by S to keep the electric field constant in channel region. Capacitance is scaled by 1 by S because each dimension is scaled by 1 by S. So energy per transistor, if we do it from this, like energy is basically C into VDD square, right? So if you do that, right, you get that energy per transistor scales by 1 by S cube per successive generation. That means we are getting much more energy efficient transistors every successive generation. I saw a text message, but it disappears. So we are actually getting much better transistor every generation, right? From the energy point of view, right? And so if you do the power density, so power density is basically if you take energy, multiply it by frequency and the number of transistors, right? So per transistor, it is 1 by S square, and you have to S square number of transistors in a given area. So power density theoretically should not go up, right? If everything is theoretical, right? So that was the theoretical basis for scaling, right? But the reality was different. What we found is that the original assumption that we could scale voltages by 1 by S every successive generation, that did not hold true. Right? voltage scaling actually plateaued, right? Around 1 volt region, it actually plateaued for quite some time, right, in planar CMOS. Right? And another effect that started coming in is leakage power started increasing. Right? So if you recollect your transistor drive current, right, it is basically it follows the VDD minus V threshold square, right? That law is basically that's an indicator of your current drive of a transistor. So when you cannot scale voltages down, right? You try to scale the VTH down from where it was, right? And that increases the leakage power. The transistor actually never switches off completely. So with these two effects that we could not scale voltages. So if you cannot scale voltages, the whole theoretical basis of Dennard scaling is gone, right? So if in this equation the voltage is not scaled by 1 by S, you can imagine, right? Power density will start going up, right? And then you add the leakage power on top of that, power density started increasing. So that actually changed the whole game, right? That we cannot pack more and more transistors. Even if we can pack more and more transistors, we cannot turn them on all at once, right? So there is a new phrase that was coined some years back. It's called dark silicon, which basically is an analogy of load shedding in the chip, right? Just like in CT, right? We have load shedding in parts of the CT. The way we operate the chip is almost similar, right? So we'll never turn on all the transistors at one go, right? Because that will cause huge amount of power burn, right? Heat dissipation. So we'll selectively do load shedding within the chip, right? Which we call power gating or voltage reduction. We will basically cover all those things here, right? But it is like, if I give an analogy, it's basically load shedding within the chip, right? So that at any given point in time, only a small fraction of all the transistors that I have packed in the chip is actually working. Rest of the transistors are not working deliberately, just to contain the power density. Any question till this point? Okay, so before we get into the power reduction techniques and other topics, let's first get some basic understanding of what is efficiency, what is performance, what is energy, what is power, right? So that we conceptually understand what we are trying to optimize and what are the trade-offs, right? In engineering, it's like the way engineering is different from pure science is that engineering is all about trade-off, right? You cannot get everything good, right? If you want something good, you have to accept something bad, right? If you want to pack more transistors in a given area, you have to turn off many of them. You have to do selective load shedding in the chip, right? So that's a trade-off, right? So or if you turn all of them on, then your performance will improve, but you will generate too much of heat, right? So your cost will go up in terms of containing the heat, or your reliability of the entire chip will go down, right? So these are all different types of trade-off, right? So to understand different trade-offs, we have to first understand the fundamental concepts on what we'll be trading for what. So let's start with two key things called performance and efficiency. So I'm taking it an analogy from our real life situation, right? If we have to buy a car or a two-wheeler, right? How do you make the decision? What are the key things that come in our mind, right? Is my voice audible? Okay. I think for some people it is difficult, but most of them can hear. Okay, I saw one person say mileage. Any other things you'll be considering? That's a very good point. Performance, mileage. What is performance? Okay, let's keep commercial part out. The price will come later. So mileage is one thing. What is performance? In the context of car, what is performance? Safety features. Okay, that's good. Airbags. No. Okay, what are the top two things that will come, right, in your consideration? Top two things. kilometer per hour. Okay, speed, top speed. Okay, very good. So generally speaking, most of us think these two aspects as topmost consideration. All other things will also come, right? Price, model, features, airbag, comfort, all these things will come. But these two things generally come in our mind, and even car companies also advertise these two things, right? You will see that many car companies will be positioning either on top speed part or fuel consumption, right? For example, brands like Maruti, right? Their advertisement is focused on kitni deti hai, right? Which is basically fuel consumption. Right? Probably BMW will not be talking about kitni deti hai. BMW will be talking about top speed, right? That is, you can go up to 200 kilometers per hour, right? So either it is top speed or it is fuel consumption. Okay, I think some people having difficulty hearing me. Is my voice clear? Is my voice clear? Okay. Some people having difficulty at their end, but I think most of the people are saying they can hear. So top speed is one consideration, fuel consumption is another consideration. These two, in my opinion, are probably the topmost thing that come in our mind, right? And then once one of them, at least one of them is made, then we go for the other things, right? Airbag, whether leather seat or carpet seat, right? Or whether automation is there or not, audio system is there or not, price and other things, right? So top speed is basically an indicator of performance, right? How much performance I can get out of the car. And fuel consumption is basically an indicator of mileage, of efficiency, right? Like if I purchase 1 liter of petrol, which is basically an indirect measure of energy, right? How much outcome I can get out of it, right? Kilometer is here outcome, right? So how much outcome I can get out of 1 liter, which is basically an efficiency metric, right? So we are basically talking about performance and efficiency. So the way we choose a car and the way we choose a chip are not very different, right? So when customers buy chips, they also think about these two things, right? What is the performance? What is the efficiency? Let's do one more step. So that is at the time of purchase, right? At the time of purchase, we look for top speed or top performance and the efficiency, right? So when we are actually using the product, right? Let's say when you are using the car, right? That means we are actually driving the car, right? How do you optimize our travel, right? So that we get best out of what we already purchased, right? So this in industrial term, it's called TCO or total cost of ownership, right? It's not only the purchase cost, but also the running cost, right? When I'm running that particular product that I have bought, right? What is my cost, right? Or what is my, okay. So this is no brainer, right? So if you have to go from point A to point B, if we have no other intention in mind, right? Just to roam around and other things, we generally choose the shortest distance because that both gives us faster turnaround time. We can reach the destination faster and we also consume less fuel. Right? This is no brainer. This is also no brainer, right? We switch off the engine when the car is not moving. So if the car is stationary, let's say we have taken a break or we have hit a signal where the red light is for a long time, we generally tend to switch off our engine to contain fuel consumption. And another thing is also that we tend to drive at a speed which help us reach the destination on time. Right? Overspeeding, though it's thrilling, right? Always overspeeding is thrilling, but it's not very safe, right? You may reach your destination a little earlier, but there is no reward for reaching earlier, right? If you reach earlier, you have to just wait there, right? There is no reward. You have to reach on time. You should not be having a delayed arrival. You should reach on time, but early arrival generally doesn't help in most of the cases. Right? But early arrival does come with its cost and other penalties, right? It is generally more expensive. You'll be burning more fuel if you overspeed, right? It also is prone to failure because your car may overheat it may have a breakdown, right? All sorts of things can happen if you do overspeed, right? We generally try to find an optimal speed that allow us to reach on time in our destination. We choose the shortest distance, right? That means we minimize the workload to reach the destination. And we also do other techniques like switching off. Basically, we try to minimize or reduce waste, right? Switching on engine when the car is not moving is a waste, right? So we actually minimize waste. So these are all the intuitive things that we do while we are driving. Right? So driving a car and driving a Jeep are not too different, right? So you'll be seeing that when we will be driving a Jeep, right, we'll be following almost similar kind of concepts, right? And that those things we call low energy concepts or low power techniques or whatever, right? Engineering jargon will come up. But these are all very, very simple concepts that we use in our day-to-day life, right? For all products that we use. Now let's come to other things, right? Energy and power. In the VLSI context, right? A lot of times these two things these two terms are used interchangeably, right? Generally, we always use low power, right? The title of this presentation is also low power techniques, right? I did not use energy, right? But energy and power are different, right? I think you know the definition. I just gave one perspective here. Right? Energy is basically the total work done by a system for a given objective. If you have an objective to meet, right? Let's say your objective is to reach from point A to point B. So total work done by the system, your car, or in the case of a chip, right? If you have a particular workload to be handled, right? A program must be run to completion, right? So that is your objective, right? So total work done by the chip to get the program to completion. That is the energy consumption. And power is the rate at which that energy is burned in a system. So one is a metric of total, another is a metric of rate. So if I look at this curve, I just hand on this curve, right? So just an arbitrary curve. So the area under this blue curve is the energy, right? Or the total work done. So if you integrate this curve over time, you get the metric of energy or total work. And the power consumption, instantaneous power consumption, is basically the height of this curve at any given time point. And the average power is basically if you take that average. So if you have to reduce, if I say that you have to reduce power, what are the options you have in this curve? To reduce instant power, let's say. If I say that that dotted line is there, right? Black dotted line, that is your maximum power limit. You cannot cross that limit. Right? If you cross that limit, you have to somehow bring the curve down. So what are your options? Any answer? Anyone to reduce energy consumption? Okay, so okay, stretch the time. Very good. Okay. Any other things? Reduce losses. Okay. No, just in terms of this curve, right? Forget cheap for a moment, right? There is a curve, right? One axis is time, another axis is something called work by time, right? And I'm saying that the height of that curve needs to be reduced, right? What are the options? If you push that curve from top, let's say somehow I can, by hand, I can push it downwards, right? What happens to that curve? It flattens, right? So, okay. So what happens is one of the two things can happen, right? One is one answer I got, right? Stretch the time, right? So you can actually stretch this curve along the time axis a little more, right? To flatten it, right? Or if you have an opportunity, right? Like where that curve starts going down from that dotted line, right? If you have enough area there, right? You can also utilize that area without stretching the time. So these are the two ways where you can flatten this curve here. So that means in certain cases, if you want to do low power optimization, it can actually increase your total energy consumption if you have to stretch on time. If If you can do any low power optimization without stretching on time, then you do not incur any energy cost. But if you have to stretch there, right, sometimes in presence of leakage and other things, right, you may end up spending a little more energy. We will come to that, all those things. But is the concept clear between energy and power? In one case, your objective is to minimize the area. In another case, your objective is to minimize the height, right? That gives the basis for what we call a low energy system and what we call a low power system. In low energy system, your goal is do as little work as possible for a given functional objective. In a car concept, right, you choose the minimum distance, right? You switch off the engine, right, when you are not moving, right? So do as little work as possible for a given functional objective. You cannot miss your functional objective. You have to meet that, but to meet that, you should choose the least amount of work as possible for a low energy system, which gives a simple mantra for low energy system: work less, sleep more, be lazy. Actually not be lazy. That's not a right word here. You should be a smart worker, right? You should, if work comes, you just finish it off quickly and go and sleep. In low power system, your goal is to meet your performance objective. So do it as fast as possible, but no faster. Right? Do not go for any overspeeding. Do it as fast as possible just to meet your performance goals. You have to reach on time, not before time. So here you have to work smart, and we'll see later, right? Many of the low power system actually borrows the concept from teamwork. Instead of one individual shouldering the responsibility of doing everything, right, which used to be a case in the past, focus on teamwork. How we can distribute the work across a variety of units, right, and get the work done, right, so that people get an opportunity to delegate and take a nap. Is it clear till this point? Any question? Okay, so why do we care about energy and power? I think we covered it in the context of car. Right? The two primary thing is basically cost and reliability. So electrical energy is not free, right? The moment you plug in something to uh, your plug point, right? You draw energy and your meter starts rolling. You start paying electricity bill. Right? Batteries are also not free, right? You have to purchase the battery and they have limited capacity, right? More energy you consume from a battery, shorter time you get between two recharges if it is rechargeable battery. Otherwise, you just have to throw the battery. Right? So battery lifetime goes down if you draw too much energy from it. More power dissipation also generates more heat, and you have to somehow take that heat away from the chip, right? So your cost of packaging, cost of heat sinking, cost of cooling, everything goes up. So you end up paying both for consuming electrical energy as well as dissipating that energy as heat energy. So you incur first your energy bills or battery cost, right? And if you generate too much of heat, then you have to go for all the cooling techniques in the chip as well as in the room. Right? So you also end up paying contain the heat dissipation. Pay penalty. These are the cost component. On the reliability side, right? The moment the temperature starts rising in a chip, the failure rate starts going up, and this is true for any system, even in car, right? If engine gets overheated, right? The chances of a breakdown increases. Same thing happens in chip. And higher temperature also slows down circuits. Right? Can cause timing violations. Both functional as well as reliability problems can occur because of Why now, right? All these things are fundamental things, right? Energy and power are very fundamental, right? Why we are talking about it now, right? For the past 10 years or so, right? It has become very, very mainstream, right? One of the primary objectives in any design. One is market forces. So we all want more functionality in the same or smaller footprint, right? Our cell phone should be able to do everything. It should play the games, it should play multimedia, we should be able to take calls, videos, right? Everything we should be email, right? All functionalities we want in that small footprint. And we also want higher performance. Like we want higher speed, no latencies, right? Both from our computers as well as from our personal mobile devices. And these days we are also more environmentally conscious, right? Government across the world, right? They are going for more green energy, right? So all these heat dissipations and other things, right? There are environmental consequences for that. So that awareness also is way higher compared to what it used to be earlier. So these are the market forces. What are the technology enablement, right? Why we can do it now and why it was maybe difficult earlier, right? So one of the primary reason why today we can do power reduction is we have smaller and more cost-effective transistors. We can actually trade off transistors for power relief because transistors are cheaper. Right? It's basic economics, right? When some commodity is very, very expensive, right? We focus on its highest utilization. Right? That how much I can utilize that because I have already incurred very high cost in procuring it, right? So I have to utilize it most. Right? But when the commodity turns cheaper, then you start thinking, right, what else I can do going beyond just the utilization. So earlier, right, when transistors were very, very expensive, right, people only thought about getting the maximum out of those transistors. Right? How much more performance I can squeeze out, right? How much more features we can get, right, from those devices because I'm incurring heavy cost in putting those transistors into the chip. But when it became cheaper, we started thinking about other alternatives. Okay, now power density is also increasing. Right? Can I spend some transistors to buy some power? Other key enabler are advanced EDA tools. Right? The EDA tools are way better today, right, in doing faster and more accurate power analysis at every phases in design cycle. There are automated optimization and fixes and implementation flows, which are way more mature than what it used to be in earlier generation. That's a key enabler that very complex and large SoCs also we can manage a lot of power reduction or power optimization. Okay, so how do we measure efficiency in a chip? Right? This is actually a very general for any system, but I'm doing it in the context of chip. If you read any literature on performance or power optimized performance for any system or chip, you probably come across a phrase called performance per watt, which is basically a metric that is used to see it for a given amount of power burning, what is the performance I'm getting. So if I define here, like this is not fully technical, I'm taking some poetic liberty here to depart from the core technical thing just to make the concept a little simpler, right? If I define power as outcome per unit time, right? It's basically how many kilometers I can run per hour, right? So kilometer there is outcome, right? So in chip also, right, there will be outcome, right? How many instructions I can run. Right? So completion of one instruction in a processor is an outcome. Right? So outcome per unit time is a metric of performance, and power is total work done per unit time. That's the definition of power. So what is performance per watt? Outcome per unit time divided by total work done per unit time. Right? Roughly, like if I just take the time out of the equation, it is outcome by total work. It's basically that fuel efficiency, right? How many kilometer per liter. Now, what is the total work, right? So for a given system, when you define the system, right, its outcome is already part of its spec, right? That what do you want that system to do, right? So that part, so numerator in performance per watt is coming from your spec, right? So it is kind of fixed. The only lever that you have for any kind of optimization to improve the efficiency achieved is the denominator, which is the total work done to get to that outcome. And if I define the total work as useful work and wasteful work, combination of that, that means useful work is any work. So I'll define this right here. Useful work is any work done toward the functional objective of the system. This is the minimum distance between two points, right? The minimum work that we have to do to achieve my functional objective. That is useful work. And any other work done by the system is wasteful because that is not adding to your outcome. That is a waste. So in any low power optimization or low energy optimization, you'll be focusing on this wasteful work. You know, to somehow reduce it or eliminate it from the equation. Right? More you can reduce wasteful work, higher will be your performance per watt, and more will be your energy. So this gives the basic mantra for low power design. Eliminate or reduce all wasteful work whenever possible, and work as fast as possible for a given performance constraint, but no faster. Okay. So if we understood the work, let's understand who does the work in a digital system. Right now we are narrowing it down to a digital system at a circuit level. So who does the work? Anyone wants to give an answer? Who does the work in a digital system? Answer. Okay, so let's again. Very good. Transistors. Okay. So if we think of a digital system, right, this is applicable only for digital systems, not the analog. So if you think of a digital system as a complex interconnected system of buckets, right, that are connected to VDD and VSS, energy supply and drain. Right? There is a drain and there are energy supplies, and these buckets are connected to those energy supplies and drain through open close switches. So if we open the switch, the energy flows from energy supplies to the bucket or from bucket to the drain. And if we close the switch, then the energy remains where it is. Right? It doesn't move. So in a digital system, the work gets done by orchestrating a coordinated sequence of filling and emptying this bucket. So if we think of a digital system, the way the state space moves from input to output is basically a series of charging and discharging of capacitive nodes, right? We call this filling and emptying of these buckets. A series of that. It's like a wave from input to output, right? To get the output. So the real workers in this system are those switches that control the flow of energy in and out of those buckets. This is the view of one bucket system. So this is that bucket. In any VLSI textbook or any other literature, you will see that bucket as a capacitor, right? And then there will be a pull-up or filling switch, we call, right? It is basically a PMOS pull-up network or a single PMOS transistor. And pull down is either a single NMOS transistor or an NMOS pull down chain. Right? This is used for emptying. So when I close the pull-up switch, right, then the energy flows from VDD to the bucket, gets stored in the bucket, and when we open the pull-down switch, then the energy from the bucket comes out and goes to the drain, which is VSS. So this is the flow of energy that happens across the digital system. So we'll be focusing on this very simple bucket system, and we'll see right how we go and optimize uh, the energy consumption given this bucket system. Another thing that we should remember that the way digital circuits or complementary complementary MOS circuit, right? CMOS circuit works is that functionally speaking, at one point in time, both pull up and pull down will not be open, right? Because if both of them are open, then the bucket doesn't get any energy. Energy flows directly from VDD and VSS. Right? So when the pull up is open, pull down is closed. When pull down is open, pull up is closed. Right? So that the energy can flow into the bucket or outside of the bucket, right? Out of the bucket. So functionally, we never come to a point where both pull up and pull down are simultaneously open. Though we'll see that it happens accidentally during this whole process. It happens by accident, and we try to minimize that accident. But functionally, we don't do it. Intentionally, we don't do it. So then the energy will flow directly from the VDD. That will be a drain wastage. Any question till this point?
Hello, sir. They are typed in the chat window as well as question and answer window. I think we will take at the end, sir.
Okay. I generally prefer interactive sessions, so I,
The online session is
no,
very
no.
difficult, sir.
Like it's a little bit of departure from my natural style. But anyway, it's okay. It's a new experience. Okay, so we now understood who the real workers are, right? The workers are basically those open close switches, or we call them transistors, right? So they are the real workers, right? So what are the states in which the workers can be in a system? There are only 3 states in which a particular worker will be at any given point in time. Either he is working, or he is resting, or he is sleeping. It's no different from human beings. Right? We as human beings, we also have 3 states, right? Either we work, or we rest, or we sleep. Right? So these are the 3 states for transistors also. Right? For every single transistor in a system, right? These are the 3 states, right? Either the transistor is working, or it is taking rest, or it is sleeping. So out of these 3 states, in your opinion, what is the most wasteful state? In the sense that state should be avoided from energy point of view or low power point of view. Fantastic. Resting is the worst state. We don't want transistors to be in resting mode, ideally speaking. We want them either to be working or to be sleeping. But we cannot avoid rest sometimes, because sometimes short sleep, just like human beings, right? If you get 5 minutes of time between 2 work, right? You don't go to sleep because this is too expensive. It takes time to go to sleep. It also takes time to wake up, right? So you generally go to sleep when you have long hours, right? Let's say more than a few hours. If you have time, then you go for deep sleep. Right? Otherwise, sometimes you take short nap. That also, if you have, let's say, 1 hour time. But for 5 minutes or 2 minutes, you generally don't go for sleeping because there is an overhead of going to sleep and coming out of sleep. So the same is true for transistors also, just like humans. So sometimes even if there is no work, we cannot put them to sleep. We allow them to take rest because there are some overhead associated with sleep. That's why we end up getting into that state, resting state. But this is an undesirable state as far as low energy design is concerned. Okay, so this you will find in any textbook, right? This is a very textbookish thing, right? When the transistors are active or working, right? The power consumption is given by that equation. Short circuit. So first term is the dynamic power or switching power, and the second one is the short circuit power. I told you, right, that by accident sometimes both pull-up transistors and pull-down transistors will be simultaneously on, right? That is by accident, right? And when they are both on, the energy or power that gets dissipated, we call it short circuit power or short circuit energy. Right? This is called PSC. Generally, this power is a very small fraction of the overall active power. So very, very small fraction. The way we design the circuits is generally not a big concern, but it does happen. But the primary thing is the dynamic power, which is basically given by that equation, right? CL square and multiplied by activity. Right? Alpha here is activity and it is the clock. I think we already discussed that resting is an undesirable state because we ended up consuming power, right? But we actually don't do any work. Right? So we are burning energy, we are consuming power, but we don't do any work, right? So entire thing is waste. And in sleeping state, the power is switched off, right? So we don't burn anything. Like we don't do any work, we don't burn any energy also. So I think two of the wasteful thing we already discussed, ESC, which is the short circuit power, and the leakage power during the resting state. Is there any wasteful work in CL VDD square? Alpha CL VDD square FCL? Is it all useful work or there can be waste there too? I'm talking about working state. In working state, can you have wasteful work hidden under alpha CL VDD square F square? Okay, we'll see that even in alpha CL VDD square F clock, there are wasteful work, right? And a lot of techniques are used to minimize that wasteful work even in that switching power. Yes, I'm getting some ideas there. Right? Using alpha. So what are the levers for power reduction while transistors are working? One thing these things we already discussed, right? Reduce work or go slow or scale out. So how do we reduce work? One is use smaller buckets. If you use smaller buckets, right, it will be quicker to fill them. Right? So if you can quickly fill them out, your or it will also hold less energy, right? Less amount of energy. Right? So you will incur less penalty in terms of power and energy. Right? And reduce the activity of filling and emptying. Right? If you can somehow minimize the activity of filling and emptying, right, for your given workload, then also you incur less energy and power. The other option is going slow or going scale out, right? There is a difference between going slow and scale out. We'll come into that, right? What is scale out and what is here? The levers are basically voltage and frequency, and these are by far some of the most important levers. In fact, voltage is probably the most important lever for energy and power reduction, just because it comes as a square term, right? In the dynamic power, we have seen it is alpha CL VDD square if. So all others are linear, only VDD is square. Right? So you get maximum mileage or maximum benefit if you can somehow reduce the voltage. Many of the low power design techniques or low energy design techniques that focuses on voltage because that's where you get the best benefit out of all the effort that you put in. So how do we use smaller buckets in the system? Right? One is use smaller gates. Right? If you go to any textbook, they will say that gate sizing. Right? If you don't need a large gate for your timing, if the path is already timing closed or not timing critical, go for sizing the gate downwards, right, for lower power consumption. Gate merging, right? Gate merging, what it does is, right, if two gates are separated by two simple gates are separated by long interconnect, right, it may be better to merge those two into a single complex gate just to minimize the wear length, right? So that the wear parasitics that is also part of CL that gets reduced. Right? So it reduces the size of it. buffer addition removal, sometimes gate sizing and buffer addition are done in tandem, right, to get the most optimal benefit. Buffer removal, right? If there are unnecessary buffers in the path, right, that were added during some timing optimization, you can remove it if it doesn't create any timing problem. So for power optimized cell libraries, right? Some cell libraries are designed for low power. Right? They use lower pin capacitances, lower voltage levels, threshold voltages for the cell libraries. And the other benefit that comes naturally is that the moment you go to a newer technology node, you get that energy benefit, right? The Dennard scaling, right? In every successive generation, right? Transistors are ideally more energy efficient by 1 by S3, right? This is the scaling factor, right? So if you move to a new technology node, you get that benefit. Though that benefit is now slowing and in some cases is even reversing, but generally speaking, moving to a newer technology node will be all about. Okay, so buffer addition is basically this actually is done in tandem with gate sizing, and in some other cases, buffer addition is required for path balancing to reduce glitches in the circuit. Right? So instead of sizing a gate upwards, you can lower that sizing and buffer the net, right, for long net buffering, right, so that the net parasitics go down. These are the techniques that are used during the logic optimization. So newer technology nodes give you smaller buckets because capacitance scales by 1 by S if the scaling factor is S. Right? So the buckets are basically the capacitance, right? So if your devices are smaller, right, your capacitances are smaller, so bucket size is small. So when you move to a newer technology node, since you are scaling all the dimensions, the buckets are smaller. The other will there be the question? There was a question that will there be any problem with newer technology nodes? Theoretically speaking, no, but there are a lot of practical challenges that we faced when we did scaling, right? And those challenges started erupting way back in 90 nanometer technology nodes. Right? We will actually cover some of them here, right, in subsequent slides. Though theoretically speaking, newer technology nodes are better, but there are a lot of parasitic effects, right? A lot of unwanted effects that we have to deal with when you move to a new technology node. Right? And some of those unwanted things, when they become uncontrollable, right, we actually change the technology altogether. For example, you move from planar CMOS to FinFET. Right? Why do we switch from planar CMOS to a 3D structure like FinFET? Right? Because we could not manage those unwanted effects in planar CMOS when you are scaling it, right? Like try to scale it below 28 nanometer, right? We just could not manage them anymore. We had to change the structure of the transistor altogether and FinFET, right, so that we can contain them better, right? And now even FinFET is showing some of the problems, so we are now thinking about different other structures, right? Multiple gates, new material, maybe carbon nanotube, which is in the lab right now. These are different things that we use when we cannot contain in our existing technology, or when we move to scale the existing technology to a newer generation, we cannot contain some different structures. So reducing activity is another big lever for power reduction. Right? So how do we reduce activity? So the best bang for the buck we get in reducing activity is on those nets where the activity levels are the highest. And the highest activity net in any design is the clock, right? Because clock toggles every cycle. Right? Other nets may or may not toggle, but clock will always be pulsing, right? Always be toggling. So if we can somehow reduce the activity, if we can somehow reduce the activity in the clock network, we get a lot of power savings. So this is one technique that was introduced way back, right? It was one of the early low power technology techniques that was adopted in chip design. Getting the clock, so basically switching of the clock if the clock is not needed for a register bank or a group of clocks. Second one is logic transformation. So you can actually go for different structure of the logic to reduce the activity. Some of the gates, for example, the probability of a XOR gate switching is probably higher than, let's say, an AND gate. So if we go for some of the transformation, right, at the logic level, you can actually reduce the activity without compromising your functionality. Pin swapping, right? This is also this is not very common, but it is also used. It's basically if there is there are multiple inputs for a gate, all are identical inputs, right? And swappable, basically identical means they can be swapped across the pins, right? And one of them is very. Some people cannot hear me properly. If some of those nets are having high switching activities, we try to assign them to low input capacitance pins, right? If possible. Again, it is not always possible, but wherever possible, we try to do this kind of pin swap. Bus encoding. This is also a very old technique, right? We go for bus encoding to reduce the number of toggling in the bus, right? Gray codes, for example, is used, right? Because the long buses have very high capacity load. If they switch with a lot of capacity load, right? And you got a lot of energy penalty. So go for bus encoding to reduce those activities. And reduce unnecessary glitches. Right? Glitches generally happens when the paths are not properly balanced across multiple inputs of a gate. Right? If one input comes earlier than the other one, right? For a short duration of time, there may be a glitch at the output of the gate. Right? So we try to reduce that wherever possible by balancing the paths across the inputs of the gate. Or sometimes if the delays are not too high, then there may not be sufficient energy to overcome the gate inertia. So we just go for a little slower gate, and that also reduces the glitch because the gate's own inertia can take care of it. So this is also generally used to reduce the activity. Like unnecessary glitching is an unnecessary energy penalty. It is energy. Pre-computation. This is also a part of kind of a logic transformation. If something can be pre-computed one cycle ahead, right, in an easier way, then we can save a lot of switching. For example, in a comparator, it can be used, right? So if there are two 8-bit numbers that need to be compared, and the most significant bit of one number is 1 and another is 0, we know that we don't have to compare all the bits. Because by just comparing one bit, we know that one number is bigger than the other. Pegor techniques are also used. Okay, so let's come to some of the bigger levers, right? The voltage, especially, and along with that. So voltage cannot be unilaterally reduced. Right? That's why voltage and frequency are always used in tandem. Right? It cannot be unilaterally reduced because if you reduce the voltage, the gates become slower, transistor becomes slower because the drive current reduces. And if the transistors become slower, and if you don't reduce frequency, then there will be timing failure. Right? Whenever you reduce voltage, you also have to think about frequency. So what is the impact on frequency? So generally, frequency also has to go down along with the voltage. But overall benefit is higher because the relation is V square F, right? So frequency goes down by F, voltage gives you a V square V. Overall, it pays off. Here again, the basic philosophy is that each device should get minimum possible voltage to get its work done on time. It has to finish its work, it has to finish it on time, but it should not get any more voltage than what it actually requires. If I go back to that equation, right? If I go back this equation, right? I told you, right? Can you identify wasteful work here, right? So two obvious things were ESC and VDD into I leak, right? They are very obvious. But are there wasteful work in alpha CL, VDD square, FCL? You can have waste here too if the VDD assigned to your worker is higher than what the worker actually requires to complete its work on time. Then you are incurring higher dynamic or switching energy than what is required. Right? So you can have waste here too. So each device, when you go for voltage and frequency optimization, so each device should get minimum possible voltage. I did not mention frequency here, so frequency comes as a consequence. Right? When you go for voltage reduction, you have to also change frequency. So how do you go about doing it? First is every part of the chip doesn't need to be the first. Your processors and the IOs or some of the other device management units, right? They can all have different performance and outcome goals, right? So they can run at different speed. Right? Generally speaking, generally the processors are the fastest units, right? And many of the uncore units or non-processor units can run much slower than the processor. You have to match the voltage and frequency to different functional units of the chip, right, or a system in an SoC context, right, so that everyone gets the right voltage and right frequency to do its job, right, nothing more than that. That leads to multiple voltage and frequency domains, right, that makes the design more complex, right, end up creating multiple islands of voltage and frequencies, right, multiple clocks, right, multiple clock frequencies for different parts of the design. So your overall circuit overhead, lesson route overhead, verification overhead, all these things go up. They all should be justified for the power saving that you achieve. Right? If your overheads are more than the power saving that you get, then you actually don't go and incur it. Again, this is a trade-off cost, right? So you have to balance the thing, and only when your power savings are justified for all this overhead, you go for this. But in this approach, right, when we do this, right, one thing you probably have noticed, right? So when you assign a particular voltage and frequency, it is kind of fixed for that particular unit, right? It doesn't change over time, at least in this context, right? So it is fixed for the functional life of the chip. Right? But in real life context, right, the chip's workload changes with time. Workload is never fixed. So the power consumption should also, ideally speaking, match the workload. It should be dynamic, right? If the workload is high, I end up burning more power. But if the workload is low, I should also adjust my power consumption accordingly. So the fixed voltage domain, fixed frequency domains, they don't allow for that, right? Because once you assign a particular voltage to a particular region, that voltage is fixed, right? You cannot change it, right? So even if there is no work happening, resting state or this workload, right? You still incur that cost, like your voltage level stays the same. So we came up with a new approach called DVFS, dynamic voltage and frequency scale. Here we dynamically try to adjust across a few voltage levels, right? So it's 2 or 3 different voltage levels and frequency levels. To see like if the workload changes, can we anticipate the change in workload, right? From bus activities or from any other indirect activities, or if your operating system can give any clue, right? That you are heading towards a lower activity period, right? Can we dynamically reduce the voltage and frequency? And again, if the workload increases, right, can we predict it and dynamically increase? Then we get a much better benefit than a fixed voltage or fixed frequency. It's called DVFS. A newer concept, a derivative of DVFS is called AVFS, because what happens is if you look at this curve, right, when you go for that characterization for DVFS, right, what is the right voltage and frequency, right, for a particular chip, we generally try to characterize it for the weakest chip or weakest device, because if you don't do it for that, then there will be functional failure, right? But when the chips are actually manufactured, right, the process corners or there will be process variation, right? No two transistors are same, right? No two chips are of the same strength. Right? So there will be a lot of variation. In BGFS, we don't factor in those variations. We actually go for assuming that it is the weakest corner and go for the correct line. In AVFS, we try to dynamically correct that. Right? Basically, there will be some additional circuit overhead in terms of sensors and monitors, right? Which will continuously monitor real time the circuit activity. Right? So you can have real time performance monitoring, real time temperature monitoring, right? And based on all these things, right, you can actually do a more fine grained cleaning of your voltage and frequency. Right? And you don't have to go for this margin. Right? You need the strong device curve, frequency versus voltage curve, and with device curve, there is a margin. Right? So that's a wasted power. So you can somehow eliminate that margin and go for more closed loop or feedback based voltage and frequency scaling. Then you actually don't incur any energy penalty that is caused by the margin. So another very popular way of achieving power saving is trading transistors for to buy power. Right? I told you, right, when some commodity becomes cheaper, right, you try to trade it off for newer things, right? So when transistors became cheaper, we started trading it for buying power, right? We go for circuit duplication, right? Intuitively speaking, right, this is a waste, right? Why should I duplicate a circuit? If I have one adder, why should I go for replicating it into two adders? Or if I have one NAND gate, why should I go for two NAND gate, right? Or if I have a single core, why should I go for 2 cores or 4 cores or 8 cores? Right? Though mobile phone companies have figured out a way to make it a marketing campaign, they like consumers of mobile phones think that if there are 8 cores, it is better than having 1 core, right? Or 8 core is better than 2 cores, right? But this is basically a circuit duplication, right? Instead of 1, we are having many. Right? So it's basically to when you duplicate the circuit, right, then you are basically dividing the work among multiple identical units, right? So instead of one team member, you think of, I told in earlier slide, right, it is all about power, low power design is all about teamwork. Instead of a single person doing all the work, you add more team members in the team. Right? So if you have, instead of one person doing all the work, you have 4 people, 4 identical people, right? And you distribute the work among all 4, right? Each one can run a little slower. Each one don't need to run very fast to complete the work on time, right? Each one can go a little slower, right? Because you have now 4 people doing the same work, right? So in circuit duplication, that is what is exploited, right? When you duplicate the circuit, then you divide the total workload among these duplicated circuits. And when you divide it, each one has less work to do, so they can go slow. And when you go slow, you can reduce D and F, and you get the V square F benefit. You actually incur some penalty in adding transistors, adding area, and adding CL, right? So when you add transistors, you are also increasing CL, load capacity, right? But that gets well offset by the V square F benefit that you get, because you can run each inlet now at this clock frequency. So if one person was doing all the work at, let's say, a clock frequency of 1, now if you have added 2%, then each one can have half the clock frequency. You hide the latency with the throughput, right? It's like a TikTok, right? In one age, 1% does it, in another person. So this is one very easy technique that is used everywhere, right? To get power relief by duplicating the circuit. It can be a small block, it can be even a processor core, right? As I told you, instead of going for single core, you go for multiple core, right? You can go for multiple specialists, right? You can in SOC context, specialists are called accelerators, right? Accelerators are very good at one thing. General CPU is basically a generalist, right? They can do all sorts of things. They have high level of programmability. When you go for accelerator, they are further optimized, right? It is somewhere between pure hardware and fully programmable hardware, right? So somewhere in between. So they are more power optimized. Right? So you go for the specialist hardware called accelerator, right? or multiple cores, right? To get power. Okay, that's all about reducing power while in working state at the circuit level. There are many other techniques that we did not cover today. There are many other techniques at different levels of abstraction, right? At architecture level, micro architecture level, system level. Right? We did not cover all of them. We focused on the circuit level. But those are primary topics within the circuit space. And now let's focus on the most wasteful state, that is the resting state. We ideally don't want the transistor to rest, right? But if we have to allow them to rest, right? What can we do to reduce the energy consumption? So in resting state, it's all about controlling the bad current. So there are two types of current that flows through transistors. One we can call good current, another we can call bad current. Right? Bad currents are like many different types of current. Collectively, we can call them bad current. Good current is a single current that flows between drain and source of a MOS transistor to the channel region when the transistor is on. Right? If the transistor is on, the current that flows from drain to source is the good current. But there are many other components of current, right, that flows at different parts of the same transistor. They are all collectively called the leakage current or bad current. That current can directly tunnel from the gate to the channel. We call it tunneling current. It can be when the gate is switched off, there can be still a current between drain and source. We call it leakage current. There can be reverse bias, reverse junction current to drain and drain region to the bulb. Right? So there are many different small components of leakage current that flows to the device. Right? We collectively call them bad current. And the goal in any low power optimization or low energy optimization is to contain these bad currents. And when we absolutely cannot control them, we go for a newer technology, device. What are the levers? So one is the improve the control of gate for all sorts of current. Right? We want the gate to control good as well as bad current. Right? It has to suppress the bad current and enhance the good current. So the first thing that we did in planar CMOS, right, back in 65 nanometer node, right, is introducing high K dielectrics, right? Because we saw that when we started scaling the gate oxide, right, the direct current from the gate to the channel region, right, that started shooting up, right, because of the thinning of the gate oxide. Right? So we changed the material, right, from silicon dioxide to some other material we moved, where we used the dielectric, higher dielectric constant to increase the capacitance, right? So that the electrostatic control of the gate is enhanced. So that gave us some relief till the point of, let's say, 28 nanometer or so. And after that, it started bailing off again, right? Again, we could not control the bad currents for the device. So after 28 nanometer, we actually took two different branches, right? Two different camps came up actually. One was led by Intel, and another camp was led by a consortium of companies, right? ST Microelectronics was there, Global Foundries were there, right? IBM was there. Right? All these companies they came up with another camp, and Intel was driving the other camp. Right? So Intel's camp was the FinFET camp, and the other camp came up with a new technology called fully depleted silicon on insulator. FDSY is actually a very simple concept. FinFET is actually a very complex concept. It actually changed the complete architecture of a gate, of a MOS gate, right? But FDSY, it actually tried to remain close to the planar CMOS. It is still a planar technology, right? Unlike FinFET. All it did, right? The concepts are similar, right? So if there are two types of current where the good current flows just under the gate, right? Channel region is right under the gate, right? So good current flows right under the gate, and the bad currents are generally flowing away from the gate, right? in deeper bulk areas, right? The bad currents. So if that is the case, right? If we somehow can narrow down the channel region, right, and isolate those bad current region, then we can have a better gate control. Right? So all they did is they just inserted an insulator, right, right under the source and drain region, right, to cut off the bulk region. Right? So that was like, I don't have any diagram here, right? I not put any copy diagram for anyone. Yes, here. So, but if you go and see an FDSY transistor, you'll see that it's a very simple concept. You just introduce an insulator right below the gate channel region, right? So that the gate has now a smaller area to control, right? And that enhances the gate's control over the channel. That is FDSY concept. And it is actually used extensively in many low energy applications, especially IoT applications. FinFET came up with a different approach, right? FinFET says that if we can somehow increase gates contact area with the channel, right? Overall contacts, right? Then if I somehow can wrap the entire channel region with gate region, right? Then we can have better control of the channel region, right? So they came up with a 3D structure, right? And wrapped the channel region from all sides with gate. So that gave a better, tighter control of gate over the channel. So, that is FinFET. Right? FinFET is more expensive than FDSO. Right? That's why FinFET is generally used in very high performance applications. Drive current is generally so all advanced mobile phones, servers, they will all go for FinFET. And FDSY you see in low leakage applications, like IoT applications. FDSY. And the second thing is going for high VT devices. This is a very old technique. Right? So the path is not timing critical. You use the threshold voltage as a lever to Another very old technique is transistor stacking. Right? Series connected off transistors generally have significantly less leakage because there's no direct path from beginning to ground. Right? So there are intermediate nodes that significantly reduces current to loss. The other very important lever that we have for power reduction while transistors are resting is forcing them to go to sleep. Brute force. Right? You just cut off the power supply. If there is no power supply in the VDD to I leakage equation, if VDD is 0, right, then it is sleeping. Right? Then it is sleeping state. Overall power consumption is 0. You just cut it off. Right? So how do you cut it off? You basically insert switches, which we call NTCMOS switches. It's basically very high threshold PMOS or NMOS switches between regular VDD rail and the virtual VDD that actually is used for the block where you want the transistor. You insert those slip transistors, right, to control the on-off of the power bit. You want to turn it on or off, you can use that to the switch. The overhead here is the area overhead because you have to insert those switches, right? And you have to insert a lot of such switches because if you do not insert too many switches, then the air drop will increase because each such switch is a resistor between two VDD rails. Right? And if you have only a few resistors connecting two VDD rails, then the air drop to the resistors will be very high. You want to insert a fine grain way, right? More such switches so that the overall air drop is contained in the rails. And they also incur their own power penalty. Right? And the other thing that you have to do is when you actually go for brute force slipping of a particular region of a circuit, right? That particular circuit is not an isolated circuit. It is communicating with other parts of the circuit. So its output is going to other parts of the circuit. When it goes to sleep, its output goes undefined, right? You do not know what the real output is, right? So you have to isolate those outputs to some logic gates, right? So that when you are getting the power getting or switching off that particular region, right? No output signal from that region goes to other regions. They're all getting. So all these overheads, right? And then there, in some cases, you may have to retain the state in in a low energy mode, right? So it's basically so that when you wake them up, right, they don't have to again regain their previous state. Right? They can basically load their previous state from memory or from array of registers. And they must be low power also, right? Otherwise, they'll be. So all these circuit overheads are there, right? When you go for power getting, and they must be justified for the overall cost. I think we are pretty much done. So many things we did not cover, even at the circuit level. I told, right? We covered mostly the circuit level concepts. We did not cover architecture, system, and microarchitectural techniques that are used for low power device. But even within the circuit space, right, we did not cover many of the trades, right? For example, when you reduce the supply voltage, how low can you go? What is the lower limit of supply voltage scale? Is there any answer? Anyone wants to make a guess? How low can you go for supply voltage scale? Can you arbitrarily keep on reducing supply voltage, or there is a limit? This is an interesting topic. It's called ultra low power. It's actually is a domain, a very specialized domain called ultra low power optimization, which is not very new, by the way, right? Even in 70s, right? Even in watches and some of the medical devices, right? It use uh, basically sub-threshold voltage, right? Basically all off currents only, no on current, to actually operate the transistors, even in sub-threshold voltage. That was used, that have been used in watches and some of the medical devices. So you can actually go very, very low, very close to threshold voltage, which we call near threshold computing. So if you go and do some searching, you'll find a fancy term called near threshold computing, which is a very interesting topic these days for even in the context of computers. These are all ultra low power consuming devices, right? But we use several of those smaller modules to gain some performance. We did not cover that. That itself is a big topic. That's a separate presentation altogether. Another interesting thing that we did not cover is how do we optimize our power grid so that we don't reduce or don't waste power in distribution itself. Right? So there are two things, right? One is power consumption points, which are the transistors where actual work gets done. Another is the power distribution. You have to somehow get the VDD to all the transistors in the chip. And if the chip is big and there are several ports, several CPUs, several components, right? Then you incur a lot of I square R losses in the power grid itself. So how do you go and optimize your power grid so that you don't waste any energy in distributing the power? Ideally, your distribution loss should be as low as possible. Ideally, zero. You never get the ideal situation, but you have to minimize it as much as you can. So this is a very interesting topic, that how you can use different power management techniques so that your loss in distributing the energy is minimized. How do you further strengthen gates control over all types of current? Right? We covered it a little bit, right? Different types of devices, right? FDs one is one approach, FinFET is one approach, right? And then the new materials are coming up, right? Mostly like beyond 3 nanometers, a lot of new materials are currently under research, which can enhance gates control. This is also a very interesting topic, a trending topic that you can go and search some of it. And the other interesting thing that is gaining limelight, it's making headlines very frequently these days in the technical community, is how do you continue to follow Moore's law, philosophy of Moore's law without shrinking feature size? Gordon Moore only told that number of devices will double every few years. So he did not explicitly mention that how we are going to double it. Right? We made an assumption that to double, we have to shrink the feature size. We have to scale each dimension by 0.7 to get the scaling of 0.5, right? Because 0.7 into 0.7 is roughly 0.5. So we interpreted Moore's law as shrinking. Right? But is there any other way of doubling the number of transistors in a system, right? Which is not shrinking, other than shrinking? So one dimension that these days are making headlines is, can we go vertical? Right? We are just following the same logic that real estate developers. Oh, I think my time is up. Okay, so this is also a very interesting topic. It's called 3D IC, right? So you basically put many dies in the same package and connect them to elevator. We call it TSV or through-silicon vias, right? So by going in the third dimension, you can actually pack more transistors in a given package, right? Without actually going for shrinking. You can use older technology node, but you can still pack more powerful features, right? Just by stacking dies one above the other. These are some of the interesting trends that we did not cover today. They are all separate topics, separate presentations. So, but go ahead and search some literature. These are all very, very interesting things to study and learn. Any question? I think I'm done.
Sir, questions is typed in the question and answer window, sir. Hello, sir.
Hello. Yes.
It is there in the question and answer window, sir.
Use the window.
Q&A. Q&A.
At my end,
Yes.
there's some problem.
There are many questions, sir.
There are many questions. Somehow I lost that window.
Just that window. Just read out, sir. Otherwise, can I read out?
Yeah, you can read out the questions probably.
Could you explain the V2F trade-off?
Which one? V square F.
Yes, V square F.
Okay. So V square F trade-off is, right? It's basically when you go for this circuit duplication, right? You basically are distributing the work among uh, replication of the same circuit. Let's say you have, instead of one adder, you have two adders, or instead of one port, you have two ports to do the work. Right? Let's take two ports, right? Two CPUs doing the work instead of one CPU, right? So then each CPU, right? If they are identical, right? Then each one can run slower and can produce the same throughput, right? Without compromising the performance. Right? It's basically in one half cycle, one guy does the work. In another cycle, another guy does the work. So if you do that, you actually don't compromise any performance, because overall the throughput, if the throughput is the metric of performance, then overall throughput remains the same. But since you have reduced the frequency, now each guy is working a little slower, right? Then you can reduce voltage, right? Because you have reduced frequency, so you don't have to have the same voltage level. You can reduce the voltage, and when you reduce the voltage, right, you get V square benefit. So overall benefit that you get is V square into F. Right? So that's the V square F benefit that you get when you go for circuit duplication.
Next question, sir.
What is the next question? Sorry,
3D IC. Yeah, can you see that Q&A window? Can read it and directly you can answer.
one minute.
Side you can see, sir.
Can you
Q&A.
read it out, please? I somehow some problem at my end. I'm sorry for that.
One second.
You scroll down to see that. Can you read it out, please, for me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. One second. Is there any other element which has a bucket like a capacitor?
Sorry, can you come again?
Is there any other element which work as a bucket like a capacitor.
I did not understand the question. So,
Yes,
bucket is basically the capacitor that is connected to the output of any gate, right? That's what I used. Like describe the capacitor, I use the word bucket. So it's basically what happens is in a digital circuit, right? Every single circuit element will be connected to the next stage, right? So output of one gate will be the input of the next gate. So when you connect it that way, right? So there will be two types of capacitances that will be occurring. One is when you connect that net to the next stage gate, right? Those gates input capacitances will be the load for your previous gate, right? So that comes as a load, right? So that's a part of the bucket. And another is the capacitance of the net itself. If the net is long enough, it will also have substantial amount of uh, capacitance, which is basically the net capacitance, the where-to-where capacitance or where-to-ground capacitance. Right? So that will also be part of the overall bucket size or overall load. Right? So these are all the elements that add up to the load capacitance for any gate.
Next question, sir. How to decide which method is to be used to reduce the, I think power activity, maybe the switching activity.
Sorry.
How to decide which method is used to reduce the activity.
Okay, so there is no one rule for that, right? I described, I think, a few items here, right? So activity reduction, you have there are multiple things that you can do, right? One is through the logic transformation, right? Go for those gates which naturally switches less, right? Reduce the glitches, any unnecessary switching, right? Or glitches, right? By doing path balancing or buffer addition, right? So you reduce that. Go for encoding scheme, right? Coding schemes for any long buses, right? Buses have generally very high level of capacitance, right? So if you can reduce the switching activities on buses, right, you get a lot of savings there, right? So you go for coding where adjacent bits, right, they don't switch too much, right? So these are different techniques used in different contexts, right? There is no one thing that we should follow, and this is better than that, right? So wherever you encounter a situation, right, your objective is to use the switching activities as much as possible.
Next question, sir. Will FinFET replaces the CMOS in VLSI industry?
FinFET is the current trend, right? And FinFET is also marketed very well. Sometimes what happens is, right, when a big company is behind a technology trend, right, that also comes in limelight, right? So since some of the biggest companies in the world, right, they are championing FinFET, we are hearing a lot about FinFET these days, right? But FDSY is also equally compelling, right, for different applications. They have different applications. Right? If you have high performance need, you always go for FinFET only, right? Because the transistor offer better drive there. But for IoT applications or many of the other low power, low energy applications, right? Or in any applications where you need to use dynamic backbiasing, right? Dynamically controlled FDSY is probably a better alternative. And FDSY transistors are much cheaper compared to FinFET. So current trend is FinFET, but FinFET is also showing some tiredness beyond 5 nanometers. People are finding it very, very challenging to scale it further or squeezing out the benefits, right? Because the parasitic effects are again increasing in FinFET also. So the next wave beyond FinFET may be a new device, a new material altogether. It may not be silicon. I think FinFET itself, we are now trying all sorts of things, right? Gate all around, right? Multiple gates. Like if you do a little bit of Google search, you'll see that people are doing a lot of different gate engineering to see if we can have better FinFET. Right? But those things are still not in commercial use. Most of them are still in lab. Those large scale still not being proven. I see one question: should we include FinFET in the curriculum? Yes, why not? You should learn the latest topic in UG course, right? When I was a student, right, long time back, when I was a student, right, uh, I remember one of my teacher telling this, right, that what you guys are learning is not electronics engineering. You are learning history of electronics engineering, right? Because whatever you are learning today, right, they are all old technologies, right? These are not the current industry trend. Right? So we grew up in that system, right, where we learned the history of electronics engineering and not the contemporary electronics engineering. Right? So I always encourage people to start with the latest, right? So if FinFET is the latest, include it in your curriculum, right? So you should learn the latest. There is no need to go for the backdated transistors, right? Except for fundamental understanding purpose. You should focus on the latest and the latest.
Chachi, this is Ayan. So thanks first of all for this wonderful presentation. I think this is really very well correlated with a very basic way of understanding. So thanks for that. I have a quick question. I mean, even looking at the question answer panel, there was a question on uh, is always the low power systems will be having limited by performance. I mean, the frequency limitation will be always there. Or I would like to also ask a question that is it that low power is enabling higher performance? So I would like you to take that.
Okay. So energy efficiency is enabling higher performance. If you can get more energy efficient component, right, or energy efficient transistor, that always enables higher performance. But power and performance are generally the two sides of the trade-off. Right? That how much I can burn per unit time, right? And what is the maximum performance I want to get out of the system. Right? These are generally the trade-off items. Right? What is not a trade-off items in this equation is the energy. Right? If you go for higher energy component, for example, FinFETs are more energy efficient than planar CMOS. So naturally, right, you'll get higher performance with FinFETs compared to planar CMOS. And you don't have to do any power trade-off for that. Using power trade-off, you get power benefit also, but inherently, right, just switching to a more energy efficient transistor, you get better performance.
Yeah, thanks for that. And one follow-up question on that. I think as we are getting the benefit which we're getting from technology is slowing down, do you envision architecture playing a major role in improving the power efficiency or energy efficiency?
Definitely, right. I think people have realized it, right. We had a fantastic 50-year dream run when architects did not have to do much, right? You just switch from one technology node to another technology node and you get performance benefit, right? Just because you have more energy efficient devices, right? Now that all these things are slowing down, now the demand for good architects are going up. Right? If you are a good architect, right, your market demand is very high these days because a lot of savings are now happening at system level and re-architecting the whole device, right? Or coming up with new micro architecture. But one recent trend, very common trend, right? If you do a Google search today, right, on AI ML, you see that there are a large number of startups, right, trying to challenge the von Neumann architecture of traditional computing. Right? The traditional computers are all von Neumann architecture, right? Which basically separates memory and the CPU. Right? They are two different complex, and you bring the data from memory to CPU for work, and then you take them back to the memory. Right? It is I call it the traditional work model, the office model. Right? I actually wrote a small blog on that. Right? In traditional work model, right? People stay at home and you bring them to office for work. And at the end of the day, they go back home, right? And in that process, they incur a huge penalty in terms of energy and time loss in traffic, right? In Bangalore traffic, you lose a few hours, right? Just in commute, right? Which is not any useful work, right? In von Neumann architecture, that is what is happening, right? When you bring data from memory to the CPU complex, right? And again, push them back to the memory after processing, right? And sometimes even without processing, because you do a lot of speculative fetching also, right? Sometimes you fetch the data, but actually don't use them, right? So a lot of loss happens there, right? So the new startups, right? A lot of new startups are trying to re-architect that and trying to see like how we can reduce this waste, right? This commute waste between memory and CPU, right? Can I bring more memory closer to CPU? That has been a trend, right? If you open up any SoCs, you will see several layers of caches, and probably like 70 to 80% of the real estate is actually memory in any SoC, right? You'll have L1 cache, L2 cache, probably L3 cache, sometimes like even a last level cache, probably some on chip or off chip, right? So there will be multiple levels of caches, right? To hide the latency of this commute, right? So the other approach that recently people are exploring it, it's still not mainstream, is in-memory computing, right? Which is basically work from home, right? Can people stay at home and continue to work, right, without actually coming to the workplaces, right? So can the data remain in memory, and can it bring the CPU or computing closer to memory? Right? So that is also another interesting research topic. Not all computing can be done in memory, but some of the simple Boolean operations, right, whether they can be done in memory. Right? For example, a copy operation, right? If you have to do a row copy, right? So do you have to really bring the entire row to CPU complex, then copy it, and then send it back again to the memory, or you can just do a row copy in the memory. Right? So these are some of the things that are happening at the architecture level or micro-architecture level. Right? This is a very interesting space. Right? This is for the right time to jump into the architect role as a career option. Right? Not a circuit designer role, but the architect role. It's very, very interesting area.
Thank you, sir.
Hello.
I think I got shot by quite a lot.
What after nanotechnology, sir? That is what another question there.
Sorry.
What after nanometer technology?
Okay. So I used to jokingly say that, right? That the definition of current is like when electrons move, right? When electrons move or charge particles move from one point to another point, that is what is uh, that that is what we call current, right? But probably we may have to change the definition of current. That electrons intending to move will be current. Right? They will not have any space to move. They just have an intention to move. That will be current, right? So yeah, we are actually heading towards a physical limit. Right? We have seen the pain in 7 nanometer. We have seen the pain in 5 nanometer, 3 nanometer, right? So there will be some time when this scaling have to stop. Probably at 3 nanometer it will stop. Like, we don't know where it will go and stop, but it has to stop at some point because uh, we are limited by some of the basic physics as well as by the equipments, right? The lithographic equipments also probably will not be able to print such a small features on the silicon. Any other question?
Sir, still how many years the Moore's law will stand?
How many years?
Moore's law will stand.
I did not. Can you write it? How many years? I did not hear it properly. Can you come again or write it in the chat box?
Yeah, I just message you. Yeah, I've messaged.
How many years the Moore's law will stand? So the basic philosophy of Moore's law that number of devices in a circuit will double, right? That is what Gordon Moore told. Gordon Moore did not talk about scaling or any other thing. He did not tell how it will scale. He only predicted that it will scale, right? It will double, right? It will double every couple of years. Right? So that philosophy probably will continue, right? So I told, right, when people uh, hit the wall in physical scaling, right? They started going in third dimension, 3D stacking, right? Can we put one wafer on top of another wafer? That is also like it's like what real estate builders, right? They followed, right? They first started shrinking the rooms in a house, right? When they could not shrink the rooms any further, right? We hit the limit of like let's say 8 feet by 8 feet or 10 feet by 10 feet, right? Then they started going for multi-story building, right? Instead of one-story building, they go for two-story, three-story. Today we have like 20 floors in an apartment, right? All connected by elevators, right? So with elevator, you can move from one floor to another floor, right? Similar concepts are being introduced in chip design also, right? When you cannot scale any further in one particular plane, one XY plane, right? You go for multi-story, right? You stack one die on top of another, right? And connect them to elevator. We call it TSV, two silicon vias. And that actually significantly reduces the wear capacity. You don't have to do too much of wearing in that. So, because you have done vertical stacking, right? The distances between different blocks can be reduced significantly. If you use that kind of stacking, right? If we take it further, if we imagine further from there, right? One day will come when we'll be able to stack transistor on top of transistor. So today we are stacking one die in top of another die. Probably we'll be able to stack one transistor on top of another transistor. Right? Then we will probably not incur the penalty of TSV. We should be able to do much more fine grained connection. Right? So all these things will happen, right? To continue to scale, continue to follow Moore's law. So Moore's law will be there, but the way we will be scaling will be different. Some light on leakage power with scaling. Okay, so leakage power is actually increasing with scaling, right? Because we are doing the VDD scaling also, right? With the scaling, so leakage power is actually increasing, and that's one of the concerns. That's one of the reasons we actually moved from CMOS to FDSY and FinFET to control those leakage power, because with scaling they actually started going upwards. How we read from the history of what techniques to the industrial what techniques. Not understand that part, right? History of what techniques to industrial what techniques. Whatever we discussed today are all used in industrial design. Hello.
Hello.
So whatever we discussed today, these are all industrial techniques. These are not history of low power design.
Okay. One more question I have asked you, sir. Hello.
Yes.
I have asked one more question to your chat window.
Power island definitions and creating power hour strategy for island based on the specific. What is the question again? By power island, I believe you are referring to the voltage domains, right? Voltage and frequency domains.
Yes, sir.
I did not get the question there. It is just a statement. Power island definition creating the power hour strategy for specific.
Any questions are there? We will contact you by offline, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you can reach me in many other electronic ways, right? You can connect with me in LinkedIn. You can connect me in other form. Right? And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask. Right? If I know the answer, I'll give it. I may not know the answer. I may not know all the answers for all the questions.
Thank you, sir, for your wonderful information about low-code techniques, how we can apply for real-time applications. So, any question from the panelist? Ayan, sir?
I think I asked a couple of questions, so I would like to thank Mr. Sabyasachi for this very informative session. Thank you very much, sir.
Thanks,
Dr. Parmeshwar
thanks
Shishani.
everyone for attending this late evening presentation, which actually overshot its time. So, so sorry for that. I was allocated 1 hour of time, but I overshot it. I did
No
not manage.
problem, sir. It's very informative. Dr. Parmeshwar Acharya wanted to speak something? Thank you once again, sir. I sincerely thank all participants for their patience as well as cooperation. Now we are winding up this webinar. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a
sir.
nice
Thank you.
weekend.